We are going to follow the money.
Everything you need to know can be understood with this simple phrase: follow the money. And believe me, that's what's happening.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to College Sports Follow the Money, an all-new podcast diving into the critical issues surrounding the big business of college sports. I'm Andrew Monaco, joined by former president of Texas A&M University and former chancellor at the University of Missouri, Dr. Bowen Loftin, and former vice president and general manager of Fox Sports Southwest, Jon Heidtke. From NIL to the transfer portal and opt-outs, to the college football playoff, conference realignment, and more, we tackle the key issues facing college athletics today and into the future.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money! You loudest black man!
We welcome you to another edition of College Sports Follow the Money, the 60th edition. You love those round numbers, don't you? Along with Dr. Bowen Loftin and Jon Heidtke, I'm Andrew Monaco. Howdy, my friends. Good to be back with you for this episode.
Howdy to you.
Dr. Loftin, we've had a little time to digest, I guess, from our last episode. So much had happened until that point, everything coming in, and now we have the opportunity to, as I said, digest a little bit. What have we learned since the settlements came down and how it will affect everything?
Well, we talked about it quite a bit in the last episode. And by the way, I would say this, as far as I can tell, unscientifically, episode 59 was our most watched / listened to episode ever. And it probably should have been. It represents a true watershed in sports and our view of that, college sports and our view of that. The House settlement, again, this covers three cases, two major parts to it. One says we're going to pay out over 10 years, $2.78 billion to athletes who have not been allowed to benefit from their NIL over the last decade, roughly. And that goes back to 2016, actually, for that particular count. So that's part of it. And and we talked about specifically the way that money is being allocated among the various institutions here. The NCAA picking up a big chunk of it, but also the D1 schools. And we're talking about both FBS, FCS, and non-football schools. All three have different pieces of this. And that was detailed very carefully in a letter that Charlie Baker wrote to the D1 leadership right after this became public. But we haven't yet heard that Judge Wilkin has accepted this settlement. Everyone thinks she probably will, but we're still waiting for that. The other issue is going to the future. Athletes will be covered are allowed to be paid directly by the schools going forward, up to 22% of a school's athletic budget. It is my fervent hope that there will be a very solid agreement, at least within the conference, about who gets what, which athletes get how much. I'm particularly interested in how that works out between men's and women's sports, between revenue and non-revenue sports. We just don't know the answer to that yet. My hope is, again, that at least the conferences will come together and figure out an equitable way to do this over time. If we don't do it well, there's going to be endless litigation going forward, is my concern, which continues to tie up the problem. The NCAA is saying we've stopped all this now by having these settlements and these three antitrust suits. Of course, one's still out there in Colorado without being factored in. But I do hope that we get to some degree of certainty. But even with a reasonable degree of certainty, I still think litigation will occur, and it could be years before we really know the nitty-gritty impact of this, sport by sport, player by player, school by school, conference by conference going forward. Jon, what have you heard? You've been putting your ear to the ground over the last many days since this came out. What are you hearing from your sources?
Mostly more questions than answers. I think, again, there's still a lot of uncertainty around, the NIL world. How do you develop clear, consistent guidelines for that process and keep a set of rules that are fair to everyone? Because I think, again, they really didn't address the pay-for-play issue. Certainly, I think the NIL in its intended form has been discussed, and I think, again, it's still again, I think most people believe that is the right thing to do. But again, the pay-for-play inducements have seemed to have no one's wanting to address that elephant in the room about how to work around that and put, again, clear, consistent rules. And then for those who may potentially break those rules, who enforces it and how is it enforced? So I think that's still a great question out there. And then I think, again, you saw some of the spring meetings last week. The SEC folks all got together in beautiful Sandestin. And I think Trev Alberts probably said it best. I don't think we have a revenue problem. We have an expense problem. And so how do we continue to address those expenses across the board, and what do they look like? And I think, again, we've got some clarity on certainly what the expenses are going back to pay for the damages, post, pre-2024. But again, we know what the salary cap is, or what the revenues that can be projected going forward. Interesting. One thing that comes up that people talk about is that if you look at this case is a 10-year case, so that would take us roughly to 2034. And if you look at 2034, what else is happening in 2034 is virtually all of the television contracts will have come up by then. So that could be, where you start to see some more significant, seismic shifts around that particular point, because all these things are going to be coming up at once, or have the capability to come up at once, which I think is interesting from a timing standpoint, giving the, if you look at it, we have 10 years now to figure all this out. I think that's probably a long time and probably too much time. So how do we get to there sooner? But I do think, again, this at least starts to put a pin in it. How do you start to address these problems? And I think the real challenge is going to be, how does the schools, the conferences, even the NCAA look at this, and how do they sort of move forward in a systematic procedure, try to address these issues sort of one by one? I don't think they can solve them all at once, snap their fingers. So what does that process look like, and who starts to get in a room now, have those conversations, and set the course? Again, don't think it's the NCAA per se, but I do think probably, Greg Sankey's mentioned a couple of times about how the Big Ten and the SEC probably need to be much more in line with how these issues get addressed, because I think both of the conferences will probably look through this world through the same lens, and they're obviously the two big boys out there. So that's probably where I think a lot of this stuff has got to have to start, and again, start to lay the groundwork for what the new, what the new landscape looks like, and hopefully, to the best of their degree, how do they put some fundamental, guardrails around some of these issues that continue to generate the most questions.
Dr. Loftin, you talk time and again about litigation outside of these three cases, and as just happened, there was some in West Virginia, not affecting with the NCAA and the dollars there, but it was an eligibility case that got solved. Just one of those things you were talking about, the things that are out there that are going to keep getting solved or adjudicated. And the one in West Virginia just came up, didn't it?
Yes, it did. There was yesterday a proposed settlement. This is a case largely brought by attorney generals of a number of states against the NCAA regarding their eligibility and transfer policies. The judge issued an injunction some time ago which stopped those policies. The NCAA, to their credit, did get their act in gear pretty quickly, and the D1 rules group has put together a new policy for them that has been sent to the Judge Bailey in Northern District of West Virginia to make a decision on soon. I think it's likely, since that pretty well covers everything that was asked for by the plaintiffs, it's going to be accepted by the judge. It'll become the law of the land. What it does basically is say there is no limit to transfers. You can transfer as much as you want to, and you're immediately eligible on that transfer. So it sort of recognizes that new world we're in right now, where players can make decisions pretty quickly to move around. It's likely we will still be having windows for individual sports as we have right now. So you'll have a certain time period each year when you can put your name in the hat in the transfer portal to go forward. The other thing it's going to do is allow for some equity changes too. Those people who were denied eligibility when they transferred over the last few years, going back to the 2019-2020 academic year, are going to be given an extra year of eligibility. So that's a temporary sort of thing, but it will at least, in principle, right the wrong of having a person a few years ago who went into the portal to move and then was denied eligibility for a year. Give them a chance to have the eligibility extended by one more year. Once that group of people is through the system, it'll be over with then. So again, this is another kind of big change. It's not a monetary change directly, but it does reflect the reality that players are going to be pretty free to move around. And you two guys want to reflect on that. What is that going to do to us? We've had a bit of this already, the way the portal has worked, but now it's being codified in a very, very strong way towards this is the new world. Players can move around at will.
Well, to me, that certainly now yells out for collective bargaining, because that's part of the process that, you start to build those rules on what that looks like, both from an institution and from a student athlete / employee, how that process works. So I think that would certainly be something that would be adjudicated or negotiated, if you will, in that environment, because I think, again, nobody wants to see unfettered free agency. I think that's total chaos. And I think we've all seen the impact that has. So how do you start to put some guardrails around it? But that leads back to question 2, question 3. Where does this process start? How do you begin to work that? Do you separate, again, do you separate football from this enterprise and work through that for something different? Or basketball and football, the revenue generating sports, sort of have a different set of rules than the Olympic sports or non-revenue sports? So all these things then come back into play. And I think that's what's kind of paralyzing the industry right now, is where do you start and try to address those issues one at a time to try to slowly check the boxes and eliminate some of these issues to try to get to a more manageable process as we look through the lens of college athletics.
When I was reading through that suit of the 7 states that were part of that, you talked about the attorneys general. The one phrase that jumped out at me was good academic standing. I don't think that's ever changed with that. So I think that takes away the mercenary. We know the old joke. I'm not going to college to play school. The old Ohio State quarterback said that. But with the good academic standing. So there's got to be some of that. And I don't know how much that's going to be. We've gone from transfer and you had to sit out a year. We went from transfer and you couldn't transfer within your own conference to now unlimited transfers. And it went pretty quickly. Now, there was a period where if you put in the waiver for the transfer, the NCAA just said, go ahead. It used to be there's got to be a medical reason or something like that. Then it went to, okay, you can transfer, no penalty. Now to unlimited, it got there awful quickly for that. But I find the good academic standing phrase in that suit to be something where there's got to be some kind of investment by the student athlete to that first school or second school and then third school. So you're not just mercenaries going there. And I think it applies to a small number. It really does. I think when you have so many transfers, and at some point, each college is now going to have a talent acquisition department, similar to a front office in the NFL or the NBA. And I think the first question that has to be asked, are you running away from something or are you running to something? And at some point, I also think when it comes to the portal, when there are more guys sitting out than get new teams or new schools, that's when I think we're still in that period. I'm with John on this. There's still this flux period whatsoever with all of this. And all of a sudden you see this name and that name. Well, there's a lot of guys who are sitting out, a lot of ladies who are sitting out. They don't have the place. And if I can continue my rant for one more, at some point, whoever is overseeing this has got to get a handle on the tampering, because it has gone on way too long and it has not been checked whatsoever. If you go in the portal and you say, okay, I don't want to be contacted, you already know where you're going. Awfully fishy to me. Again, I know the NCAA has been absolutely toothless, but that tampering part has been really ridiculous. And I don't know how they check it. I really don't. I wish I had an answer for that, but it's something that I think has to be addressed at some point by whomever is overseeing all of this.
do support your point of view here, Andrew, fully. It needs to stop. I just don't know how.
Right.
It's not just the players; it's the parents. It's a variety of people involved here in these informal communications going on about this. We know that when you can see it when you see a name go in the portal and go out of the portal so efficiently, you know that was all preordained, and this was just a formality to go through the necessary, online work required to do it. I just don't know how you manage to make it work without a real army of investigators out there, without great access, without having too many constraints by the courts on text messages and those kinds of things going on and phone calls going on. I don't know how to make it work. I just wish people would own up to it and say, look, we need to stop this and make it a fair process going forward here. But back to your original point here about the West Virginia case, one of the key plaintiffs in this was a student athlete who specifically transferred to West Virginia. This is why the venue is there, quite frankly. And this young man, a basketball player, came out of a very difficult environment. We can all appreciate what challenges he encountered. And he just said very publicly that, look, West Virginia, given what they've gone through with opioids and things like that, provides a much better place for me to be for my mental health than where I've been. Now, that was an interesting argument. I think it was very compelling that this young man comes down and says, look, I'm where I was, and I wanted to go somewhere else, and the price I had to pay was sitting out for a year. And that was a real strong basis for this lawsuit and for now this settlement to go the way it has. So I do think that there are really good reasons, medically in particular, that someone might decide that a better place for me is over here than where I am right now, which clearly justifies the transfer. And why should I be penalized a year of being forced to set out to make this change happen here? So I fully get that. And I think it's a very good decision, if this is accepted by the judge going forward, to make things much easier. I just still worry about, again, you said, how do you manage your roster? How do you deal with this? And the way we're doing it right now is under the table oftentimes, with people, agents, parents getting involved and making promises about things. And then the portal becomes basically a window dressing on this thing that legitimizes what has really already happened in terms of an agreement between parties here, which was mostly illegal, probably by our current rules. I just don't know that this decision will make it any better, Andrew. I wish it could be, but I don't know how. But without having many investigators out there, you could actually make this thing go away.
Part of my thought, and we've always kind of joked about this because college coaches say there's no minor leagues and I can't make a trade. I'm waiting for down the line when it's immediate eligibility in week 6 and you're playing for another school in week 7. It seems to be that's the way it's going. Now, I don't know if that will happen. I get it. But if you look at the trajectory of this, I'm not happy. So I'm going to go to this school, and the very next week you're eligible. And then you're getting into what is in effect a trade within schools if we keep going this way. I don't know.
Well, as Jon has said, the NFL model is the one we're moving towards very clearly. To the extent we have free agencies and things like that, and if we get to collective bargaining, the contracts will likely be the way this is handled, guys. I mean, if you get to collective bargaining with an athlete or a group of athletes, you're going to have a contract that's enforceable legally. And that may be the way in which this becomes more settled over time, as we have not just simply a portal out there, but we have a contractual agreement between an athlete or group of athletes and their employer, i.e. the school they play for, determining what the boundaries are here and what the rules are. That may be an answer.
What you have to understand, Jon, and you know this, when you get that guaranteed money up front, after that, you can be cut at any time. There's no scholarships when it comes to the NFL. Now it becomes the careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I think that's the part that probably hasn't truly been explained to these young student athletes yet, through that, how that works out. But again, through this overall process, I think we can, again, there's other leagues that have already done it. how do we take the best approaches from all those leagues and put them into this new form? And again, we're never going to solve every issue, but if you can take it from 100% of chaos to 30% chaos, that's a step in the right direction. And so then can you eventually eliminate all the issues? No, but you put enough guardrails around them where you control as much of that, the potential damage or unintended consequences as you possibly can. And there's always going to be an exception, for all of the different rules that are out there. And I think, again, one of the things the NCAA never did was really look at those exemptions through a common sense approach, just like this West Virginia case. Should that have ever been adjudicated and gone to trial? No, let the kid go back to West Virginia. Those are all the right reasons for him to do so, but they didn't. So his recourse was legal, and that opened up a whole other can of worms now that makes, instead of just this one issue, you were holding me back, now you can transfer for virtually any reason you want to. And to your point, if you're transferring 3 times within a season, I mean, that's going to be ridiculous, but it'll happen. Guarantee it'll happen.
Yeah.
Some guy goes down with a knee injury, you're starting power forward, the guy's not playing.
Right.
I'm gonna media playing time.
Yeah, or I'm butthurt because I got benched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I found out that there is a college football playoff schedule. Isn't this interesting? I believe they're basically playing every single day of the week at some time in 2024. Right? Playoff first round, Friday, December 20th, Saturday the 21st. There will be one game on the Friday, and then there will be 3 on Saturday. When you get to the playoff quarterfinals, you've got Tuesday, you got New Year's Eve, and then you've got 3 on New Year's Day. The semifinals will actually be on Thursday and Friday. There won't be that doubleheader of the semifinals, and then that championship will now be played on January 20th of 2025. An interesting schedule in that the playoffs with the new 12 teams get spread out over a number of days.
It does. And the other issue here is that they managed to avoid all but one NFL conflict, which I thought was a major driver of how this schedule came together. But having these things spread over 2 days makes it a different world. How does that play out money-wise, John? Do you think that's a benefit to the broadcasters here and the sponsors to have those 2 days for a playoff round?
Well, I don't think anybody wants to go head-to-head with the NFL. That's certainly going to depress your overall viewership. So I think, again, you want to try to work around that. But I do think, again, I haven't studied the schedule all that close to see what else is on out there. I mean, you're going to have NBA, you're going to have some other sporting conflicts. But I think if you can do your best to avoid the NFL, this will most likely be the next most watched event out there. So how do you maximize your viewership? You guys may remember a few years ago, they always wanted to have the CFP games on New Year's Day instead of New Year's Eve, but they had to move them to New Year's Eve for some other issues that popped up. And those games are the lowest rated of all time because people just unfortunately aren't watching a lot of TV on New Year's Eve. Other things are going on. So again, as a network guy, you're always looking to try to put yourself in the best possible window to drive the most eyeballs. And so, and again, if you're TNT, you're just happy to be in the game at this point. So I don't think they probably had a lot of input on that process. Fox probably would have wanted more if they were the partner in the way this thing would have worked out for lead-ins or lead-outs of NFL games. So, and my guess is, I mean, when you look at it, they spent some time on this to try to make sure they've maximized their viewership for the series of games, because they certainly want the first year to be as successful as possible.
Turner actually gets 2 first-round games. They'll have the second game. They'll have 2 on Saturday, where ABC and ESPN will have 2 of the first-round games. Turner will have 2 of those first-round games. So that goes back to your point. Turner, TNT, now part of this process and part of the broadcasts.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I'm looking here, I'm planning to pull the schedule up, but I think you'll see a lot of these games will be simulcast on ABC as well, which will help push their overall numbers up too. So particularly if you've got a Wednesday game, there's not a whole lot of Wednesday night entertainment on network television anymore. So I think, again, you'll see a lot of simulcast with ABC, which will help drive those numbers as well, particularly under the ESPN brand.
Yeah, very, very clear. I think that the whole issue is, of course, money driven. We're following the money here, clearly. And again, it's interesting to see how the absence of Fox is driving in, I think, some flexibility. You said that Fox would have had maybe more leverage in a way if they were part of this equation, but they don't now. And TNT is sort of a new beat for me in terms of football anyway. And so that'll be interesting to watch that. But you're right. I'm sure ABC will be either independently showing or simultaneously with ESPN showing these games as well, which provides a little more flexibility for a viewer. I mean, ESPN is pretty ubiquitous, clearly around the country and the world, but ABC is one of the old standbys.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I don't know if you guys know this, and I haven't done my homework to see, but will all the other bowl games have ended by December 20th?
I think there's some interesting overlaps here. I'll look back at this. The Athletic did a nice little look at this, and so that's where I was looking at it a while ago. I was looking at the CFP schedule, and Andrew kind of walked through that with us, which is good. But if you look beyond that, there's at least a small number, one or two anyway, conflict issues with the bowl games intruding into this. Do you think bowl games will ever diminish in terms of numbers, John? I mean, this is I've always argued we had too many bowls with 40 plus, and yet they still persist. We talked a while back to the manager from one bowl game up in Dallas area that thought it was going to be an ongoing thing having this kind of number of bowls. But do you see a CFP schedule like this impacting how the bowl's success or failure is defined?
I mean, I think again, bowl games aren't going away. It's certainly, if you're a media company, if you're ESPN, I mean, you don't even care if people go to the game. It's great television content for you. You know, you'd like to certainly have fans there, but that's certainly not the number one reason these games exist anymore, particularly if you would call them what the minor bowls are. Again, off the top of my head, I'm looking at that. Basically, ESPN is going to probably have two different bowl promotional going on. The bowl games leading up to December 20th when that starts, and then the next month. I'm sure they were not going to have bowl games going all the way up to January 20th, but I could certainly see them having taking their marquee bowl games from that December 20th to that January 9th date and sprinkling them around there to maximize viewership for those as well, to just promote college football. And again, that would be a pretty, meaningful counterpunch, if you will, for NFL programming out there too, depending on what games you got. As long as you have the good brands still playing in there, even in a 12-team format, there's still going to be other brands that don't get in that are going to help, ESPN or others look at the bowl game scenario as a meaningful content in that window.
So for the quarterfinals, it's the Fiesta Bowl, the Peach, the Rose, Sugar. And then the semifinals will be played at the Orange Bowl and the Cotton Bowl. And then the championship is in Atlanta. So while you're playing the first round on the 21st, you're still going to have the Alamo Bowl. You're still going to have the Camellia Bowl. You're still going to have that. To your point, John, that will be the programming inside and surrounding the playoff game. So you're going to have that. There are some that are early. Some will be done early. And the other thing is these conferences make these deals with the bowls. So you're still going to have that, the SEC, whether it's the Liberty Bowl or the Independence Bowl, and then going to the Belk Bowl, the Music City Bowl, all of those, you still have those tie-ins for those schools. And coaches love those 15 extra practices as well in December. They kill for that. And I understand. Yeah, that's it. But that is the one thing for the process of a team is you get that extra time to practice. Do bowls that's another story. Do bowls make money? Some of them don't. But John, to your point, that's why ESPN jumped in on those. Yeah. It is their programming for December 26th, for December 23rd. They have all of that. So, I mean, I know 6 wins is a low bar, right? 6-6. I totally get it. But you're going to have the coaches fighting that's one that they would fight for. They just love the extra practices for their freshmen, for that red shirt, for the injured player. They love that development. I don't know if it'll ever go away. Maybe at some point the NCAA says, look, you can have a couple of weeks to practice even if you're not in a bowl. I don't know, but I know that's something that they've always fought for. What coaches have not been thrilled about, and now they're starting to change, is a 9th SEC conference game. Once again, Dr. Bowen did this. Dr. Loftin did this. But a 9th SEC game, absolutely huge. I'm going to take it from this part. You can't tell me 9 SEC games doesn't increase every SEC school's strength of schedule. That's going to be a monster when it comes to that 12-team playoff.
Absolutely. And again, I know that didn't get resolved this last week, but I do think it's not if, it's when. There's a little bit of a kind of a pissing match going on. I think Sankey wants ESPN to pony up more money. ESPN said we've already ponied up more money, and this new deal that should be included and contemplated. So again, I think they'll eventually get there, because again, when you're talking about adding that extra game, and again, I think for all the schools would want that. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at if you look at the A&M schedule, we're playing 3 schools against the Sisters of the Poor. If you could add a game there against Alabama, instead of, Hardin Simmons, I don't think Coach Elko is going to be a huge fan of it, but think about the fans and with the attendance and the crowd and the television ratings that's going to draw. So again, if you're a network, you want those marquee games. If I'm ESPN and I'm able to move, one of these extra games over, and that beefs up my ESPN Plus schedule or my SEC network schedule, that's a win. And so again, to me, that one's boggled my mind that they haven't got there yet, because again, I think everybody wins in that scenario. But it appears that again, right now, it's a price value conversation between ESPN and the SEC about what that value is worth. And so we got Texas, Oklahoma coming in. There is going to be a bump for that. ESPN's probably said, "Hey guys, we've already bumped your up considerably with the taking the CBS package, and it went up 5 times, and we're going to pay you more for Texas and Oklahoma. Enough already." And I think again, Greg's trying to certainly maximize the revenue, as any conference commissioner would, particularly in this day and age, when you see what's coming down the pike in terms of what your new expense lines are for all your member institutions. So they'll get there. I just don't know why they haven't got there yet. So that does surprise me a little bit. Because again, if you think about it too, in a 12-team playoff, if you're the Big Ten, I'm going to be out there saying, well, apples to apples, if I've got an 8-3 Penn State against an 8-3 Auburn, I should, my schedule's much tougher because I played an extra conference game and Auburn didn't, and so I had to beat Illinois. They had to beat, Georgia Tech State. So those are things that I think that will come into play that could potentially penalize the SEC in terms of, that selection process if they feel that that's not an apples to apples schedule. And you can certainly see on paper that it's not.
I agree, John. I think there's so many issues here regarding what fans want and what coaches want and what TV wants. I mean, the fans and the TV are probably close together because the fans want to watch good, strong games. The TV people know they'll make more money off of those games, but coaches are reluctant. That was kind of the problem, as I understood it, when this came up before with the SEC, is that not all, but some of the coaches, balked at this, saying it makes my life harder to reach my 6-win goal here. But I think that has to go out the window with this new revenue world we're in. There's no way that a school can afford to say, we don't want to play a more valuable game when you need the revenue to deal with the past and the future compensation for your players. Revenue has to be maximized now. You have to follow the money. There's no way to avoid it right now. And I can't imagine a coach being allowed to go forward and dictate we're going to stay to an 8-game conference schedule here going forward. It can't happen. So I believe it's just a matter of time. Speaking of Commissioner Sankey, a couple of days ago, he put out the new wheel for the SEC containing the 2 new schools joining the conference in July 1 of this year. So I happened to just pull out of my closet this historic piece right here.
The old wheel.
If you look quickly, you'll see 13 spokes on this wheel, folks. That's the one we had for a short time after Texas A&M joined the SEC, but before Missouri did. And that Missouri did, we had a 14-team conference, and that kind of went away. I kept one of those just to make sure I had this artifact in my collection here. Which didn't last but a few weeks, but it was something I thought was pretty interesting that A&M was the newbie here all by itself before Missouri emerged as the 14th team for this new SEC. And now we have 2 other teams coming on board this year. So do you think, John, that the value proposition for the addition of Texas and Oklahoma is done and baked in right now into the additional revenue? And that's the reason why this 9-game thing has come up? Or is it still kind of a package situation we're talking about here with ESPN?
It's probably a little of both. So again, at the end of the day, so I think again that if Greg says we're going from 8 to 9, And again, if you look at the schedule, probably the way that schedule is written is that the conference delivers you so many games. That's the way these things are usually written. All right. And it doesn't probably delineate between a conference game and a non-conference game. One of the things that if you were Conference USA back in the day, what they would negotiate for is that they would always love to try to do those, what was it, 2-for-1 games to get a big power conference school to come play at one of their schools, which would allow them to sell that to Fox. And Fox would, every one of those games that was a crossover, when UTSA played, say it was Texas A&M and they played at the Alamo Dome, that would be a game that would be part of the Conference USA package, which would be the #1 game for Fox to pick that week to have that game. So that's been, an age-old process why those schools would play those 2-for-1s, because they knew that they would get that television value. They would be able to extract television value from the network partner, because they would be bringing one of the big boys to those networks, which historically don't have that. So I think, again, this is a point where I think they'll eventually get there. And I think, again, minds will see. Again, if you're able to say, like, I don't think, if you've added Oklahoma to that schedule now, or Alabama, to that mix, and that's going to allow you to hopefully play more of those rivalry games too at the end of the day. So it just makes sense that they get there. And again, I haven't been on the inside of those deals, but I bet it boils down to the way those games are defined. And I think going forward, conferences are going to probably define a different value for conference games versus non-conference games against somebody who may not be in the Big 12 or the Big 10 or one of those types of conferences. So those things were never really negotiated to that level of granularity, but my guess is going forward, those will be. And again, conference games are going to have more value than non-conference games.
I wonder if that game gets played more towards September as opposed to that week in November, where almost every school in the SEC plays a non-conference before their rivalry game at the end. I'm interested to see when that is scheduled. I know it rotates of late that some schools play that third week of September is the first conference game, but that's usually the outlier. So I'm interested to see how the scheduling will work out for that, like where in that schedule it will be.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. My guess would be that November schedule now tightens up, and you don't have that anomaly of after you've played 6 conference games, now you're playing a Hardin-Simmons that week. So, and
now most SEC, if not all, have 2 byes over the course of the season, so that may also help do that.
Okay, that helps too. If you have one early, one late, that'll give your team a chance to hopefully rest up and heal some injuries.
Not that it's the job of those Power 5 programs. Where do those schools now make the money when they are knocked out? Where does that revenue come for them? Because those football games are an awful lot of their athletic department revenue, and that will not be there any longer. It's not like a TV deal is going to come in and say, okay, we're going to take, you're going to get this money. That's what I find becomes interesting. Again, leading to more of the haves and the have-nots.
I would offer this, Andrew. I've watched this happen. When I first became a college president and got involved with these negotiations, the non-conference games are a negotiation between 2 schools. There's nobody else really involved in that conversation. They're obviously outside forces, but there are 2 people or 2 schools here negotiating that. And the price has gone up. So the price has escalated dramatically since my first year as a college president to the current day here. So what I would predict is that even though we'll have maybe one less, the lesser schools who are playing SEC Big Ten opponents are going to have a little lever here. You're still going to need 3 games, okay? Well, this obvious solution is increase my revenue for the 1 game I get with you to compensate for the loss of revenue for the 1 game I won't get. So I believe there'll be a negotiation going on here. And again, I've watched this happen year after year. It's gotten tougher to get a New Mexico to College Station each year as these contracts are negotiated. Oftentimes, if they're home and home, that's one thing. But if they're always coming to you and you're paying the bill for that, I believe the school has a lever now to say, well, you still want to play 3 non-conference games, okay? You just got to pay more for each one to be able to achieve what you want. What do you think, John?
Well, yes. I think, again, you're looking at the model. I think you're going to see a model of, you go to 9 conference games, you're going to probably play two other schools, let's call it from the Big 12 or from the Big 10 or some of that ilk, and you're going to have one game against, it's a pretty much a W, fill in the blank, what teams you want to play in there, UTSA, somebody of that ilk. So Prairie View, something like that, those kinds of games. So I think that's what happens. But if you go back to your point, if you look at it, by going to 9 conference games, all right, if you look at it from a revenue standpoint, let's just say you paid your school $1.5 million to come and play. All right. And now I add a conference game there, and I probably added versus what I made in ticket sales for that game. It's probably an extra $3 million because now I'm playing somebody else there. So you just almost made $5 million bucks. And if you're looking to try to get to 22 million, that's a pretty good way to get, a lot of your way there with not a whole lot of effort. So I do think there's some value to that from an economic standpoint there as well. And then, the other thing I can think about is that if, again, let's talk about, if we're looking at spring football, why don't you bring one of those schools in at spring football and have a more of a scrimmage, if you will, than a glorified what we have today, which, it certainly served its purpose, but now no one really cares over time. But if you're a coach, it's a great chance to put your young players in there, give them a lot of, again, look at it as an exhibition game. And I think fans would still pay for that in the spring. They're still, it's been 3-4 months since they've had a football game. Your tickets aren't going to be that, they're not going to be $100 for a game like that. But, you still could put some money in there. And I think, again, pay that school, maybe not 1.5 million, but they could get a little bit of, for coming in and scrimmaging with you at that point. So, so I do think there are other ways that those schools can get it. And I think, again, even if you look at the bowl games, and let's just say the 6-6 number goes out the door, but because again, if you're a Purdue and you're 4-7, would you go to a bowl game and play Middle Tennessee State? Probably. There's some opportunities there for your fans, at least to see you play. So I think, again, as you look at bowl games, you maybe tee those up to feature one of the schools from the power conferences against, one of the smaller schools versus having Bowling Green play, New Mexico State in the Camellia Bowl. I mean, it's still people watch it, but I think you could probably do a little bit better with some more brand names in there too. So that's another way that those schools could potentially make a little bit more money in a new going forward environment. And again, if you're a television network, I think you'd rather have the brand than, whatever their records might be if they're two schools, Coastal Carolina playing, Wofford.
I often wonder if also the schools will stay within their systems to schedule those non-conference games. You might have that. Also,
yeah,
I know
so us
Big
playing
10 and MAC always had that kind of an agreement as well of playing in September.
Yeah, so I think there'll be some gentleman agreements like that would say, you've been good for us, your players transfer here, we get a lot of your coaches from there. This is probably good for both of us at the end of the day.
Very similar to college basketball.
Great MAC quarterback at Miami might want to go to Purdue for his last year, who didn't get recruited, and now he's all conference.
I was thinking of college basketball where a head coach at a Power 5 coach somewhere or is friends with that coach and like that game. And I know that's starting to go away, which is really a shame because I don't think people understand that sometimes that, hey, it could be an older coach at a smaller school, but he gave him that impetus to become the head coach. I don't think the NCAA gets that either in the scheduling, but something like that. But that wouldn't be bad either.
Yeah.
Anything on the horizon before our next show that we should keep an eye out for?
Well, I'm interested in seeing how things work out with the World Series coming up. I'm hoping you're traveling up there, Andrew, for that World Series soon.
I'll be there.
The voice of a certain school.
If we're fortunate.
By the way, you're going to need an extra stat guy, and I'm available just in case you need one.
But
I don't doubt for a minute he's going to be there. I'm pointing to my right because that's on my screen. He will be there.
The money situation suggests to me that things are going to get different here over time. I mean, Texas A&M especially went a long time without a lot of non-football things going on in their large stadium. Now we have 2 within a week's period here. So this Saturday, after a successful win over the Wilted Ducks of Oregon, many people will trap over to the Kyle Field Stadium and observe a Texas match between 2 countries, Mexico and Brazil's soccer teams. And I'm hearing the revenue for that one and for the George Strait Conference in Kyle Field the week after that is not that large in terms of what comes to Texas A&M. Do you think that's a revenue growth opportunity for a school to do more non-football events in a large stadium to get some real serious money from that?
Well, I think that we like to use the term back in the days, the juice worth the squeeze for these types of things. So when you put an event on like that, there are a lot of expenses, a lot of work goes into it. And again, the margin might not be at the end of the day for the time and effort put into to make it work. I have seen some estimates about the local economic value of that.
Yeah, that's
when you bring in, people coming in from outside of 50 miles, particularly for the soccer match. So I think I'd be curious to see what kind of crowds that brings at the end of the day. I certainly think, again, George Strait's going to bring people from outside of a 50-mile radius as well. So again, those things, again, when you look at it at the end of the day, between the time and energy that's spent and versus what you get, I think that becomes the real question. So I think where the schools that will make the most money or the most of these opportunities are when they control the full process. So again, I go back and look at what Iowa did with the Caitlin Clark game last year. That process, that was something Iowa controlled from start to finish. They sold sponsorships for it. State Farm was part of it. Again, they had a great story to tell coming off the Caitlin Clark, taking advantage of that situation. So that was an event that they probably did pretty well because, again, that was their IP content. George Strait's going to make a pretty good check when he comes out of this. Now will A&M, be as much? Absolutely not. But again, let's kind of see when that happens. But I do think those type of events, when it's all said and done, certainly bring you notoriety. If you're looking to showcase Kyle Field as an opportunity to bring other events here, and then you can bring enough events here and you get your infrastructure in place and, does it make sense? Absolutely. I think that's why you see the SoCals, the NRGs, the AT&T stadiums, all of those people realize we have to have events in here to really help us pay for what it is. So, and then you get into a rhythm of what those events look like. Could we ever have as many events as they do? Probably not. But, I think, again, this is certainly a good litmus test to see what this type of will do for A&M, and can they hold it? Do we have the support people? I mean, again, there's a lot of work that goes into putting these things off. So I think, again, it's a great, first step. Let's just see kind of what the results are after the fact. And again, at the end of the day, will the juice be worth the squeeze? So.
Good phrase there, my friend. A very good phrase there.
I've got a couple of other points before we close. We talked baseball, and I was just going to give you a couple of things from a viewership standpoint. This year, just the college regional baseball tournament was up over 16% on ESPN year over year, and that's 59% from 2022. So that shows you that, again, people are tuning in. They want to see live sports. Baseball is important to them. It'll be very interesting, I think, to see what the women's softball championship does. I think again with the NBA playoffs ending early and the Stanley Cup not starting yet, they've got a chance to really pull in some decent numbers for that process. And then one other bit of information caught my eye this week, and you guys can ponder this until we get together again, that ESPN has a little notification of you have their app. And if you've ever got their app, you can push it and follow a certain player. All right. So number one on their all-time list on their app is, you guys know when they will get a player alert on when this person's doing something, who their number one all-time is on their app?
My first guess is LeBron.
LeBron's two. Who do you think would be one? Let's think golf.
Tiger.
Really? Tiger's number
really?
one.
Still.
LeBron, number two. You get an alert. Tiger Woods, even part that people will turn the channel immediately to go find him when they get that player app. It's one of the things that they're using to do that. Guess who just moved up to number three?
Caitlin Clark.
Well, after the little altercation we saw the other day between a former Texas A&M player and her, that I think even raised the possibility of more of this going down the pike.
Yeah,
pretty amazing.
So again, we've talked a little bit about the power of what follow the money and what Caitlin Clark is doing, and the fact that she's already 3 now on terms of ESPN's most downloaded app or click for when she's whenever she's playing or she does something, people are tuning in to go and finding wherever she's playing. So I just find that fascinating about how the media continues to go. So think about an NIL opportunity there. So now you've got an NIL. Every time someone goes to there, you're getting some type of transaction if you're that type of player, which is again what NIL originally its form was designed to be. So again, fascinating. I think what you'll see ESPN doing a lot more with that app. But again, as we get to a very customizable universe, and you want to watch your team or your favorite player, there's another example of that. But who would have thought that Caitlin Clark, if anybody would have had her at the first day of the year, would be in the top 100, or top 500, and she's top 3. I mean, it's just an incredible story to continue to follow.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, it's like Simone Biles. I mean, you're talking about a person with a lot of history here. In her case, Biles even more so in her case as a gymnast. And the success she's had just in the last several days here with being able to show that in spite of being where she is in terms of her age and time of doing this, she's still competitive, very competitive. And that's bringing viewers, I'm sure, to those kind of sports as well. I'm sure that the USA trials will be watched a lot just because of that.
Yeah. And so,
and by the way, the Olympics are nigh, guys. In Paris, here we come.
Great time. It's an absolutely great time. And I had a great time with both of y'all. Appreciate you very much. As well as our producer, Nick Savage. Thank you very much, Nick, as well. For Dr. R. Bowen Loftin, for Jon Heidtke, I'm Andrew Monaco. collegesportsftm@gmail.com. That is our email address. You ask us a question, we'll give you an answer. Thanks so much for joining us.